here's the thing. The system of the West is failing, if it hasn't actually failed. Capitalism, as it has been abused, capitalism as a system works, but the way in which capitalism has been abused, the printing of money, the quantitative easing, the fraud of fiat money and all the rest of it have conspired or have come together to ensure that the system of the West must fall. I'm always reminded of that, the famous poster with Muhammad Ali and or the sequence with Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, where Muhammad Ali has hit him and he's going down, and he could hit him again, but he doesn't need to. He just watches him fall. That's where we are in the West. We have been KO'd, and we're in mid fall. We just haven't hit the canvas yet. So people don't realise. So the system is failing, and it means that, for decades now, one young generation of young intellectuals after another has proposed socialism or communism. Socialism is communism's idiot cousin, and it tricks every succeeding generation into thinking that that Marx and the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital and Marxist thought and Engels, that they have the answers. One generation after another stumbles into that swamp. But I think what's really what fascinates me is the way in which, on the one hand, communism is still fashionable. Communism is still acceptable in polite society, or talk of communism still has some intellectual clout to it, and it's legitimate to be looking for an alternative to the system we've got, because the system that we've got is about to fall over. But what people aren't noticing, it's as though where the real power is, the elite, the cabal, whatever you want to call the people who are brokering the real power, are allowing thoughts of communism to float around. Because what has actually happened in the background is that, under cover of neo-communism, while people are distracted by that, something else entirely has already happened. The replacement for the broken system is already there, and the most of us are not going to like it. And it's coming from many sources, but it's probably worth talking about the World Economic Forum, the WEF, and Klaus Schwab, because he, for decades now, he's been banging the drum about stakeholder capitalism. I think he's been banging on about it for about 40 or 50 years, one way or another. And it's a concept, and it sounds kind of fluffy and cosy in a way, because it suggests that global capitalism can be transformed so that corporations become stakeholders in society, so that corporations, or the representatives, the board members, the chairman of corporations, become stakeholders. But it's only when you look into it that you realise that what has been done, it's not proposed, it has happened, is that corporations and by association transnational global asset management organisations are being given, or have been given, more and more power over society. And what we've always been invited to think of as democratic institutions have been eroded to the point where they're hollow. They're soap bubble, eggshell thin, just ready to disappear. I've thought for a long time now that we don't have democracy in the West. Not in terms of what democracy ever meant thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago, or even decades ago. This idea, this notion that we've all accepted, that as long as you get to vote every few years in a general election, that you live in a democratic country, is utterly, utterly bogus. We do not live in a democratic society anymore. And it's made particularly obvious at the moment in this country of the United Kingdom, because we have two parties. It's a two-party state. that you choose between in Parliament, and now they are both the same, Conservative and Labour. It's not their own ideology. They've been, you know, those when you see in the wildlife documentaries, there's a kind of a killer wasp, and its target is the big spiders, the tarantulas. And if the wasp can get its way, it injects the tarantula with its young, and the spider becomes a sort of a zombie entity. It has the wasp's young inside it, and the wasp's young eat the tarantula from the inside out. You know, that's what we've got. That we've got a zombie system here. A parasitic ideology has infested our system, and it has infested the Conservatives, and it has infested Labour, and you might as well say it's infested the Lib Dems and the Scottish National Party and all the rest of it. There's one ideology out there, and all it means is that every few years you get to pick a colour. That's what you get. You pick yellow, you pick red, you pick blue. That's what you get. That's as much as you get. So we do not have a democracy. And now the corporations and the transnational global asset management institutions have replaced democracy. Anyone thinking that we have a democratic system at the moment, I think, if my opinion is worth anything, I think is deluded. We're being fobbed off with a notion. And if you watch what the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, his book, The Great Reset, and if you go to the website and you look at the documents that are there, they're not hiding in plain sight. They're just there. It's all there. And it's quite clear that in most recent times, the WEF shifted up a gear in the aftermath of the 2008 the economic crisis, the crash, whatever you want to call it. And it quite blatantly states that the government voice, that's to say a nation state's government voice, would be one among many without always being the final arbiter. Okay, now let that sink in. So the WEF, which is in bed with whatever, the WHO, the United Nations, the whole kit and caboodle, they are working towards a situation in which the most meaningful decisions that are taken about every aspect of our lives are not the job of democratically elected and accountable people. It's the bosses of corporations that will sit together and make all of those decisions. And the WEF and Klaus Schwab and stakeholder capitalism is quite upfront about this. There's nothing hidden about it in terms of an agenda. And you know, you've got to keep, because it happens in plain sight and because we've become used to it, you've got to think about, you've got to keep reminding yourself what happens at Davos every year. That's where all the high net worth people on the planet, the bazillionaires, gather, and they talk in secret, you know, behind closed doors. You know, they pay massive sums of money to be involved. You know, and it's Saudi Aramco, Shell, Chevron and BP, right, just amongst the energy providers. In the world of food, you've got Unilever, Coca-Cola, Nestle. The technology, let's not forget the technocrats, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and then Big Pharma, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, right, they all turn up at Davos. The bosses thereof, these are private entities. This is private enterprise. These are unelected, unrepresentative, unaccountable private billionaires who get together at Davos quite openly to discuss how the proletariat should be governed and what should be happening to us. So forget your governments now. Forget your national governments. They have been sidelined. They are just counted out. They're kind of patted on the head and told they're stakeholders as well. But the kind of people that are drawn into government at the moment, your Rishi Sunaks, your Jeremy Hunts, your Emmanuel Macron, your Justin Trudeau's, your Jacinda Ardern, all of these people, be in no doubt that none of these people gives a tinker's cuss about the concept of democracy, democratically elected people. It's absolutely an overthrow. The reset, to all intents and purposes, has already happened. So that's the model that has been built. And if you look at what has been designed, you've got real world implications, okay, for everything in terms of the financial systems, governance, food production and distribution, and technology and vaccines. I mean, let's not forget that industry that Bill Gates has described as offering the best financial return on investment that he's ever seen, by a country mile. All of that is now under the thrall of this successor to democracy, this thing that is operating, while some of us are distracted by concepts like, neo-communism. Voices have been raised about what's happening with food, because when it comes to food, what you have to understand as well is that if you can genetically modify crops, if you can genetically modify livestock, you can patent them, copyright them, and own them. You can't own a cow, a natural born cow. Well, you can own it, but you can't own it. You can't own it as a product, and you can't own wheat as a natural product. But if you've genetically modified it, if you have changed it into something novel, and likewise with an animal, then you can brand it and stamp it and call it your own, and you can insist that people pay for it. They're not entitled to access to it unless they part with money for it. So there's a situation that we're in potentially with food, and that's a fundamental. If governments, if nation-state governments are not in control of food, the creation of, the distribution of, then that obviously has massive implications for the populations, which is to say us. And then if you look at big tech, there was a 2020 roadmap for digital cooperation, and amongst the stakeholders, stakeholder capitalism for that little gangbang are Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and the WEF. Right now, they are going to come together to digitally cooperate, and that means that, well, to put it bluntly, to put it simply, if you're worried about what big tech is doing around the distribution of information, censorship, social media, closing people down if they don't agree with them, big tech will decide if big tech is behaving properly. That's the reality of that UN approved roadmap. You're looking at a situation in which big tech will decide if big tech is behaving properly. It's governing itself. It's its own ombudsman. Okay, so which is to say it doesn't have one, which means that they can happily go about approving the business of monopolising, taking control of, shutting down misinformation, being the arbiters about what should and shouldn't be there. I mean, when you start to get into the potential risks of living in a world dominated by big tech in that way, I mean, I don't know where you even begin. When it comes to vaccines, right, you've got COVAX, which was it's a multi-stakeholder. That's that word, stakeholder capitalism. And it was set up by Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance, and CEPI, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Okay, and those two bodies are in partnership with the WHO, the World Health Organization. All of it has close ties to the WEF, right? The whole thing is completely incestuous. And the WHO, the main finance for the World Health Organization is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as all the other stakeholders, are closely tied up with GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, J&J, that's Johnson & Johnson. So the whole thing's incestuous, right? Now that's the body that has come together to look after vaccine development, vaccine production, vaccine distribution. Now, get this. There was an attempt made, I'm not sure of the date on this, but in the thick of the COVID adventure, South Africa and India wanted, they put forward a letter asking that the sort of the control of the vaccine, the copywriting, the intellectual property around the vaccines should be relaxed, so that they could get in among it. It was like giving out the recipe. They wanted access. They were saying we were being told it was a global emergency, a pandemic, and South Africa and India proposed loosening the controls of the intellectual property so that the vaccines could be developed. And whatever you think of him, Tedros Ghebreyesus, the boss at WHO, he was in favour initially when that suggestion came in. But who opposed it and who made sure it didn't happen? Gavi and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, working in concert. Bill Gates personally was very opposed to the idea of giving away the intellectual property. Now that's because where you might have expected a body like the United Nations or the World Health Organization in an ideal world, possibly in the world that you think you still live in, they would be operating for the greater good, in inverted commas, and that their priority would be helping the population of the world. But no, when push came to shove, it was always about profit. It was about safeguarding intellectual property, which was about making sure that profits continued to grow. It's the same with food. It's the same with vaccines. It's the same with big tech. Under stakeholder capitalism, the reality that we're walking into is that every aspect of our lives, all of the services and facilities that we might think we depend upon for the functioning of our daily lives, all of that is controlled by corporations and transnational global asset management institutions to maximise profit for their shareholders. That's all it's about. It's not about the good of us. Now, long story short, something very clever is happening in the year of the 100th anniversary of communism. That ideology that has led to nothing but mountains of dead bodies. Still and all, we're being invited to watch another generation of younger generation flirting with communism and socialism, with the idea that we will all live together once again in some kind of utopia. And under the cover of that, the World Economic Forum and all of the satellites that orbit it, all of the other organisations that are in bed with it, have pulled off a brilliant sleight of hand. It's the usual suspects. The greatest trick stakeholder capitalism ever pulled was persuading the world it didn't exist. We're not watching them. Our eye is not on the ball. And the truth of the matter is, that great reset that we've heard so much about has already happened. Because the reality, as I see it, is that we're going to live in a future that is not about democracy. It's not about communism, as the young intellectuals like to have wet dreams about. Some kind of utopia. It's not going to be that at all. There may be some kind of neo-communism, but in reality it's Klaus Schwab's stakeholder capitalism, in which the world and 99.999% of the people who live in it, we are governed by corporations whose only interest is in control of the money, control of the food, control of the technology, control of the vaccines, which those elements added together will mean total control. And that is happening on our watch while we were looking the other way.